So now inside the Jeep, I can point out some of the features of it. Sitting in the back here out of the wind a bit, so hopefully you can hear a little bit better. Looking at the dash, it's a pretty straightforward dash. It's similar to all the Willys and the Fords throughout the war. There's just some minor differences as the war progressed. Interesting things to point out then. So at the top we've got the vacuum wipers here. So these run off the manifold, the negative pressure in the manifold here, and they're quite effective actually. Earlier in the war they used manual wipers, so you had to hold on to a little handle and turn the wiper by yourself, which, as you can imagine, as these were used in all weathers and all theatres of combat, having to drive around and manually operating a wiper while driving a rather heavy vehicle off-road is not particularly ideal. So the vacuum wipers, even though they're not fantastic, are much better than the manual system. So what you've got on them is that's in the stop position there, so that parks it, as you can see it in that position there. If you pull it out, that would start it, and then that would park it again. And you've also got a manual handle there to help assist it, because sometimes they do get stuck. And also the thing about these running off the manifold pressure as well, the negative in the manifold pressure, the more you accelerate, the slower the wipers go, which is obviously the opposite of what you want. So sometimes you need to give them a little bit of a kick by using the handles there, and they designed that into it, so they understood the limitation of those. That's pretty good. Coming down then, the adjustable windshield, you can, on the arms there, you can push those arms out and you can open the windshield if you like to get a bit of ventilation in. It's not something I really use, but that is available to you if you wanted to. Then further down, we've got the universal rifle rack there. That rack sits on the windshield in that position there, and it means you can put all sorts of different weapons in it. I believe the early ones didn't have a little clip for the submachine gun, but later on they put a clip inside so you can fit a submachine gun. But I've put in a German Kar 98 and that fitted in there. It's currently got a repro carbine in there, what is it, M1 carbine in it, that's it. And that fits in quite nicely as well, so it seems to be a pretty good item. You just swing this around, I'm not going to do it now, but you just swing it round, and then you can drop the front out, and then you pull it forward, the butt comes out there, and you've got your rifle, just avoiding smacking into everything. On here then, this is the e-brake, the emergency brake or hand brake. It goes in like that. Pull it out and twist it to lock it. People have a lot of problem with these because they sit down on the rear output shaft, and a lot of oil comes out of there often if the output shaft seals are not fantastic, which they aren't often on old Jeeps. So the brake gets covered in oil, and obviously an oily brake doesn't work very well, so people often find that they don't hold as well as they should do. But I used an oily band on this one, which I cleaned up a bit, and I haven't found too many issues with it. It seems to hold pretty well. The major issue I had was when adjusted to how you're supposed to adjust it in the handbook, I found that it was dragging a bit and sometimes getting hot, but as time's gone on, I've readjusted it. I can get it to hold on a good slope, and it's not dragging anymore and heating up, which is pretty good. But obviously if you've got a new nice band in there, which isn't full of oil, I think you could get better results out of it. So again, like the carburetor, it's just something which needs adjusting correctly, and the problem with a lot of these old Jeeps is they've been sitting around for 75 years and not looked after. So things which would have worked well originally are now a bit old and covered in oil and not very good anymore, or a bit worn, and so they don't work as well, and people don't think they work properly, but that's how it should be, and they do seem to work when adjusted correctly, so I haven't got any issues with that. But I do also park it in gear as well, just as a double insurance against the thing rolling off, because although it's okay, the handbrake, it's not as good as a modern one, and you wouldn't want to trust it. They can, if I do this, I can knock it off, obviously, and if someone looks in your Jeep and knocks that, and you haven't got it in gear and you're on a hill, it'll go rolling off down the hill, which is not ideal. So yeah, glove box on the right hand side there with all the information plates on it, so transfer case, and then the data plate, and then speeds, so there's some info on there. And then up here, there's the information about the vehicle for shipping it, so there's a shipping plate. Down here, that's where, on the other side, would be a first aid kit, that's it. So there's a bracket would attach on the other side, and you have your first aid kit under there. I haven't got the first aid kit yet, I will get one, but it's just a matter of time of sorting it out. So that's where that would go. So coming down, we've got our 2 levers for our transfer case. The one on the left here, this does front axle drive. So currently the front axle is in because I'm on grass at the moment, off-road. So the front axle is in, so that's 4-wheel drive there. And then the one to the right is the range gear here. So we've got in low range at the moment, neutral would be here and high range would be down here. There's an interlock lever here so that you can't put 4-wheel drive, no excuse me, you can't put it in high range in 2-wheel drive because otherwise you would overstress it. So they've got an interlock, there is a pin in the transfer case which prevents you doing that, which is another nice feature. But it does sometimes mean it's a bit finicky to get it to go in, but just getting the gears to move around a bit, moving the vehicle forward a little bit sometimes, or dropping the clutch allows the gears to go in easier. But that's the transfer case there. Obviously we've got the shifter cane for the transmission. It's T84 transmission, 4-speed. We've got at the top, at the top here would be reverse, first, second, third. It's not like a modern transmission. You can't just slam it through the gears, you have to be careful. Reverse and first gear are not synchro mesh, so they've just got straight cut gears in them, so you have to be careful putting it into first when you're coming to a stop. So generally I'll pull it to a stop or just about to come to a stop and then just gently push it back into first, and then it just accepts it when it's happy with it rather than grinding it into first, and that seems to work pretty well. And then second is synchro mesh and third is synchro mesh as well. Going up, coming down from third to second can be done without double declutching, but if you're in a hurry or you want to do it, you double declutch to get it go down easier into second. That works well as well. So down on the floor there, in the centre we can see a starter switch. It's a foot starter like a lot of old vehicles had there. You just push and hold it for the 6-volt starter. Seems to work well. People have a lot of issues with those, with the old ones, and some of the repros are not very good at all and they wear out very quickly. So they can cause a lot of issues, a lot of starting issues. But there are some good repros out there. I can't remember the name of this one, but this is a good repro and I haven't had any issues with that so far, so I'm quite pleased. Obviously, accelerator pedal there, spring loaded. There's a little spring at the bottom. The cover is an access cover for the brake master cylinders. That's the inspection plate there. Ford stamped like a lot of bits. These are the GPW style. Brake on the right, obviously, and clutch on the left. And those are GPW style with the dimples. The Willys style ones are sort of flat rectangles, but these are the Ford ones, and I think they're in the correct orientation there. And then off to the left hand side, that's the dimmer switch for the headlights. So it's another foot operated thing, so you've got to move your feet around a lot with this, especially driving at night. So you just click it for high beam or low beam. And then to the left of that would be my fire extinguisher. This is a late war style one. Mine's missing the arms for some reason. Someone's actually appears to have cut them off. So I can't fit a fire extinguisher to it, so I might get a reproduction for that. But that's where that would go. Otherwise, that's it. On the floor there, we've got a drain. That's where one of the drain plugs would go, so the water would come out. Strengthening bolts, the fixed seats. Coming round to the passenger seat. The passenger seat isn't fixed. There we go, you can see it there. I put a felt pad down the rear of it just to stop it clanking when no one's sitting on it, because otherwise it smacks against the wheel housing there and makes a lot of noise. So this is movable, this seat. You can rock it forward like that to get into the back. And underneath, I've got a bag there at the moment, but if I move this out of the way, that's where a radio box would go. So there was another suppression item there for the radio system. So in the corner where you can see the light coming through the side of the vehicle, that's where the radio box would go, and then the hole down there is where the conduit would go to underneath, off to the starter switch where it would get the 6-volt power for the radios. I'm getting one of those to fit, but I haven't got it just yet. Up here we got a hip pad, the green thing. That's a hip pad there, so when you're sitting down, this stops you smacking against the side. I haven't found it to be particularly useful yet, but I'm sure a lot of off-road driving, if you're a big American GI, it would be quite useful. And then the safety strap there, just to stop you flying out of the vehicle. Not particularly useful. In a crash, I would imagine you'd probably want to fly out of the vehicle, as there's no safety in a Jeep whatsoever, and especially if it rolls over, I think the best thing to do would be to fly out of it rather than stay in it. But they do seem to help actually. Just going around corners and things like that, it's just an extra bit of safety. And then beyond that, there is one of the half doors, which are great for driving. They keep a lot of the wind out, flapping around the side there, and keep you a bit warmer, so they're quite nice. So coming back again into the centre, if I can get a good view. So we've got two very dim lights here. Those are the 6-volt lights. Those only operate when you set the light switch to headlights, which we'll do later. And so you can't put them on in any other position on this vehicle and to stop you being seen at night. They just cast a little bit of a glow over the lights there. But we've got our ammeter there. So that's our ammeter. That tells us whether we're discharging or charging the battery. Below that is a temperature gauge. That's a reproduction gauge. You can see the difference in the face colours there. It's a bit blacker than the old worn originals there. But that's a temp gauge. Usually on the Jeep you want about 180 degrees Fahrenheit, going up to 200 degrees sometimes, but 180 is what the thermostat's set for. And then my speedo there with a trip meter at the bottom, which you can reset. And coming across, we've got our oil pressure gauge. A new engine seems to go around 50 to 60 psi when cold, and then they drop down to perhaps 20 or perhaps 12 to 15 when hot, and then up to the fuel gauge as well. There, it's 56 litres of fuel, which is 15 US gallons, which in a Jeep is not all that much actually, but there you go. And then the panel light switch there, so when I do set the main headlight switch, which will come to us in a second, to headlights, if you pull that out, then the panel lights here on the top, which we talked about, they'll turn on. There's a column clamp there to hold the steering column, which you can see going down. And then the steering wheel, this is a later 3-spoke steering wheel here with the metal internals to it. You can get reproductions for these as well, but this is an original. It seems to be working pretty well at the moment. And in the centre we've got our horn, 6-volt horn there, which seems to work pretty well. Coming down then, so in the centre is the ignition switch. It's just a 2-position there, so that's off on my one at the moment. That's on. You can see the fuel gauge just came on there. Fuel gauge seems to work pretty well actually. You'd think it would bounce around quite a lot, but I found it to be pretty accurate, and it does bounce around a little bit, but nothing excessive. So let's turn the ignition off again, everything goes off. And then you've got your throttle cables and your choke cables there. They should have white lettering on them, but I haven't redone those yet. And they should be the other way around as well, but mine only seem to fit in that position. So you've got throttle on the left-hand side, hand throttle, and then a bit of choke as well for help with starting the Jeep when it's cold. But you don't need it obviously when it's warm. And then we have our light switch here. So we've got stop lights. Usually when I'm driving it, to get the stop light to work at the rear, I'd have to set it to stop. That means when I push the brake pedal, the stop light will come on, otherwise there are no other lights. That's headlights, so the main lights are on now, which I can then do the low beam and high beam by the foot switch, and then if I want to do the panel lights, I can pull out the panel light switch like that, and the panel lights would come on, and that's off. And then another thing, this the central bit there, that should be a lockout lever there, so you shouldn't be able to accidentally knock it into stop lights or headlights, the bright lights, because if you're driving in a war zone and you accidentally knocked it over to headlights and you're trying to drive in blackout, obviously that would be a disaster. So that switch above there should be out, and you should have to push it in before you can move to this side of the lighting. But mine's not working anymore. I do have a replacement for it, but because this is the original one, I'd rather keep it in, and as I don't have to drive in war zones, I don't mind too much. And then we've got the blackout side here, the blackout marker lights, which we saw on the front. The grille lights would come on, so that's the grille lights. And then there's also a blackout stop light as well at the rear, and then blackout drive, that would be the light on the fender, which we saw earlier as well, would come on there. So there's lots of options for lighting there. The earlier Jeeps have a different style to that. They have this rather complex push-pull device, but this is the later style, which I quite like. It's quite neat, that. So we can come back up again. We've got hood latches here, excuse me, the windshield latches. So those just undo on either side. There you can see the other one as well. They would just, you just pull those down, and then you can lie down. Once you've taken the top off, you can lie down the windshield on the bonnet, which is quite nice. So that's pretty much it for driving there.